Welcome back everyone. So today is another amazing day. We get to talk about another gaming console, and this time one of the final, actual PlayStation Ps that ever came out, besides the PSP Go and obviously the PlayStation Vita and the PSP 3. There were a lot of PSPs after this actually, now that I think about it. Now this PSP was I think an interesting upgrade for sure from the PSP 2000, which I've already covered, but I still think it was a worthwhile upgrade for sure. Now, this specific console looks very familiar to the, couple of ones that came out before this, but I do think, as I mentioned before, it brought a couple of new things that were worthwhile upgrades without a doubt. Now, this thing actually came out in 2008, which doesn't even feel that long ago, but at the same time, it feels like forever ago. And this console was still selling up until 2012, so a little bit more recently. And one thing that I always remember about these specific consoles, especially this console, was just bundles that it came with. And anytime I went to an amusement park, which I don't even go to at all, but whenever I did, I would always see bundles of these things for sale or to win or something. And that's one thing that I always remember about these specific consoles. Now when it first came out, first of all, there were a couple other names that it was known for. So it was also known as the PSP Slim, the PSP Lite, but also the PSP Bright, and I'll get into why that was the case in a couple of seconds. But this thing originally sold for about $250. Right now you can probably pick them up for $25, probably even less than that in some places. Obviously if they're in better condition and maybe, a little bit higher up. But one thing, as I've mentioned before in my Nintendo DS videos and this one as well, is that I just feel like a lot of these consoles are just going to start going up in value. Just like we've seen with the Game Boy Micro, Nintendo Wii U. If you're able to get these things in really, really good condition, and if you're able to get them with accessories and even the original boxes, dude, I would say go for it. I think that's going to be a solid thing for sure. It's probably not going to be perfect, but I think it probably will go up in value a little bit. So I think that is a pretty cool thing. Now, one of the biggest improvements that the PSP 3000 actually brought was the display. Everything else about this console was still a pretty good improvement too, but the display on this thing actually was, apparently 5 times the contrast ratio, half the pixel response time to reduce ghosting and blurring effects. If you can't tell, I'm reading this from PlayStation.fandom.com, so shout out to them. And there was a new sub-pixel structure, a newer microphone, and a new disc tray design and new button designs and logos. So we got a pretty big change in terms of the front as well. But on top of that, it also had the anti-reflective technology to pretty much improve outdoor playability. So if you're playing this thing outdoors, you're going to be getting a better experience. Now, one thing that I always noticed from my PSPs to my DS Lites is that the displays, whenever you're outdoors, it just really wasn't that great of an experience because you would always just be able to see yourself from the display because it really wasn't that great. Since then, these screens have gotten much, much better. Even with our iPhones, you go outside, you can still see the display. I remember a time where our iPhones, you couldn't even use them outside because it was just so bright. But with these ones, the displays were actually that much better of an improvement. And I think that's a really awesome thing that the PSP 3000 actually ended up bringing. Now, similarly, with the internals, there were some improvements that the PSP 3000 brought, which I mentioned before, the microphone and stuff. But I do think this console is still a really interesting console and an important one for sure. Now, with the PSP 3000, I still think one of the best things that this console had at that time that's still pretty relevant is probably the ROM ability and the mod ability besides these consoles. Now, one thing that I noticed is that with a lot of PSP 3000s and PSP Go's, you can't really modify them as good as you would be able to with other consoles, but I have seen some PSP 3000s, get custom firmware, and maybe I'm confusing the 3000 and the Go, but I really do think this console is still a really good console. Now, another thing that this specific console also brought was that games could actually be outputted into a component or composited video. So basically the video out cable we used to have back in the day, you could actually go ahead and use this console on a TV if you really wanted to. Now, there was something else that was kind of, a controversial thing about this console. And apparently the release day, this thing when it was released, there was a problem with the display specifically, and I guess the objects were in motion of the PSP 3000 screen was noticed. But Sony announced that the problem would not be fixed, which was very weird, so I'm not really too sure what happened there. But visually, you can still see that this console looks beautiful. The piano black version of this thing looks so good. You still had the headphone jack on this thing, the charging port, the battery cover on the back, which you could easily go ahead and just take out if you wanted to, and then replace with an even bigger battery, and the UMD slot up top. Now, I think one of the things about this console that really ages it is the UMD slot. I think the cartridges are the best ways to go. I was never a fan of the UMDs. I just never really understood why Sony chose to go that direction. I think it's still okay, if you want to use it, go for it. But I think the way of the future was digital, and that's why things like the PSP Go still hold up pretty well. But unfortunately, they were too ahead of their time. Things like the PS Vita, even the Wii U in a way, were just ahead of their time. And I think that's why the PSP Go will probably forever end up being like one of those legendary consoles that, predicted the future before it was there. And I think the PSP 3000 is the stepping stone of that direction. I think the PSP 3000 was a very good console, but it just had a couple of quirks. And I think a lot of people at that time, from what I've heard and from what I've read in forums of stuff back in like 2009, 2010, a lot of people were saying that it was a small upgrade coming from the PSP 2000. And after owning these consoles and playing games and all that stuff, I can definitely see that specific, thing being the case. I really don't think the PSP 3000 was a monumental upgrade, something like a PSP 2000, which was, I think, a pretty good upgrade, or even a PSP Go. I think those were crazy big improvements in terms of the whole entire PlayStation P genre. Of course, with the PSP Go, it kind of hurt it in a way, but I think the PSP 3000 is one of those consoles that, was a minor upgrade like everyone else said, and there wasn't really that big of a reason for people to go and buy it if they already had a PSP 2000. There wasn't really anything inside of it that really made people wanted to buy it. And I think that's why it didn't really sell a crazy amount. But I think things like the microphone being added, the games being able to be played on a TV if you wanted, and as well as the better display, well, those are really good improvements when you think of the long term. That just basically means that every other PSP that comes out after this is going to have a microphone, is going to have a better display and all of that. And I think those things are very important for the whole entire genre of games, but it just really wasn't that big of an upgrade as far as I can tell. But one thing that I always love about PSPs and any gaming console that's older is the gaming library behind it. There are so many games out for this thing, and the graphics of these games are beautiful as well. Like, you would still be surprised by, how decent these games are, in this day and age. You had so many like random games. You had Crash Bandicoot, Spyros, GTAs, a ton of, I think Call of Duties were on this game too. There were a ton of different games that were available for this thing, and the graphics of them are still extremely good. Yeah, they're probably not perfect, and they're probably not in 4K or whatever, but I don't even think they're in 1080p, to be honest. But I think these specific games that were played on this thing are still up to date. I think they're still really good. And even when I'm going through the UI and I'm, going through games and I'm changing up some things here and there, this is still a very fluid console. It doesn't feel like a cheap console at all. It doesn't feel old. One thing that I didn't really like about my DS Lite when I was using it like forever was it just didn't feel like there was much to do besides playing games. With this console, on the other hand, there is still a lot to do. Obviously, probably not anymore, but you had the ability of downloading games from the specific PlayStation Store. You could play online just like how you could on, the Nintendo DS. The graphics of these games were much better, and the ROMing and modding capability without having to buy an R4 card or whatever was an extremely cool thing about this device too. So I think for sure, the PSP 3000 probably will never be known as like the best PSP or whatever, but I think it's going to be known as a console that was the stepping stone to something like the PSP Go, which ended up being a pretty monumental change, whether for the better or for worse, which allowed, manufacturers nowadays to kind of focus more on mobile gaming, in my opinion. So in terms of that, I think that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.